Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we're here with Professor Stephen Gordon from Université Laval Economics, and it's been an interesting few months, economically speaking. Inflation is coming down, and the job numbers keep booming and booming and booming every month when they're expected to slow. But the narrative is still recession, recession, recession. So Stephen has been pushing back against this a little bit. So I figured we'd kind of explore that particular sense that he's getting. So, Stephen.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back, let's say, back to April when the bank first started increasing interest rates, the prospect of overshooting the interest rates was and still is a real possibility. So, like, yeah, it certainly was something not to exclude, dismiss out of hand at the beginning. But there was always the soft landing scenario that they talked about, where basically the economy would slow down to a sustainable pace, because that's the idea behind all this, is that the economy was overheating. The lots of reasons why, just pent up demand coming out of COVID. A lot of the income support measures turned out to be more generous than they really had to be. That's one of those, hindsight is 2020 things. At the time, nobody knew. So it turned out to be. So there's lots of reasons to think that the economy was overheating at the time. We saw even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we saw inflation drifting up and out of the bank's comfort zone. So yeah, we knew that some kind of slowdown had to happen. Now, people generally interpret, any kind of slowdown as a recession and bad news. But if the economy is overheating, it's in a frenzy, a slowdown is to something that's more sustainable, that does not generate inflation, is actually what we'd like to see. So that would be the soft landing scenario. Now, you could actually have, let's say, 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP on that path. I would not call that a recession. I would call that just a return to normal. It's just it's like, you're going at 130 on the highway. You're slowing down to, because you're slowing down to something more reasonable. Slowing down doesn't mean you have to go in reverse.
Right.
You're just slowing down just to something that's more acceptable. So that scenario was always there too. So there's, and of course the other scenario would be that the inflation would just get out of hand and never get back again. We seem to avoided that one. Thank goodness. So,
and it does seem to be coming down internationally as well, from what I've seen. So
and of course, like central banks around the world, like this is, I think, is a bit of a good news. We actually did learn something from our experiences in the 70s and 80s. So we knew it was the job of the central banks and monetary policy to deal with it, and they're dealing with it. Back in the 70s and 80s, people weren't quite so sure. That's why we had things like wage and price controls.
Yes. So, zap, you're frozen.
Yeah. So going through 2022, where interest rates are going up. There's always this risk, but it's always not always certainty. As we're moving along, the good news scenario, the soft landing, seems to be, that probably is certainly going up. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what we're seeing for inflation, we're still looking at 6% or something like that, but that's still year over year. And we're, one thing that a lot of us are trying to sort of point out is that the 12-month headline inflation number, we're still comparing, prices now with prices before the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So things like oil prices, wheat prices, all of those things had a big spike in spring of 2022, and we're still comparing prices now, prices before. In a few months, we're going to be comparing prices now versus prices a few months after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And though that inflation number, like over the last 6 months, since about May, let's say May, the last half of the year, that inflation rate is around 3%, which is still we're not quite there. 2% is a target.
Yeah,
but it's
it's much closer to target than 6%.
Yeah, and once again, this has been a bad year, bad few years for saying if all goes well. But if all goes well, in a couple of months, those big spikes in the spring of 2022 will roll off the 12-month calculation, and we should just see in the 12-month inflation rate go down to 3 or 4% in the next 2 or 3 months, or 4 months maybe.
Yeah.
So already right there, we're not seeing a big, huge, out of control inflation. We're seeing inflation that's at the top end of the range and probably maybe a little above. Something has to be done. Something is being done. And in the meantime, the effect on things like certainly the job market, the labor market, is nowhere near as bad as anyone was thinking. We were expecting some kind of a slowdown, and so far the slowdown kind of seems to be coming not necessarily in job losses, but in reductions in numbers of vacant posts. Like the job vacancy numbers before the were very, very high, and that's another sign of an overheating economy. A lot of jobs looking for workers. There's fewer of them now. So either a lot of potential employers has realized, oh, you know what, we're never going to get anybody at that wage. Let's just forget about it. Or people are just finding those jobs. So either way, there's that sign of overheating also does seem to be alleviating. So, the good news scenario for the labor market would have been employment, keeps tugging along, but we get rid of some of those, that excess, that very big spike in vacant posts.
Okay. All right. And yeah, the job numbers is something that I've heard a really diverse range of commentary around. There's a lot of concern that I think is being partially torqued around what Tiff Macklem was saying about sustainable job numbers. And you kind of get labor and certain economists saying, well, that means we need to have all this mass unemployment to fix inflation. And that's not how I really read Macklem's statement. So I'm wondering if you can kind of give your take on that.
Yeah, certainly they're not looking at unemployment numbers even as something as a target or anything like that. They want measures of aggregate demand, total economic activity. There's obviously a link, but when you look at unemployment, there's so many weird things going on in there. There's, you have to be declared unemployed, you have to be looking for a job. Well, how hard do you have to be looking? Demographics are a big deal for unemployment. That's what we're seeing now with population aging. So that's just going to be an issue there too. So certainly not a goal to increase an unemployment rate. And to the extent that we have an overheating labor market of lots and lots of vacant posts, I guess unemployment might actually go up. But we're bouncing off of an all-time low. So, in some sense, that's not really mass unemployment to go from just scraping, bouncing off the all-time low by a couple of tenths of a percentage point. So, certainly not the bank's goal to cause or to want mass unemployment. They just want the economy to slow down to a normal situation.
Yeah. In this notion, about sustainable employment was something that was part of the bank's mandate review. How do you think that fits into what the scenario is right now?
Yeah, and it still was inflation first.
Yeah.
Given inflation, if inflation is under control, then you might want then look at employment. Certainly among monetary economists, that was a bit of a fishy deal because you have one instrument, two targets. It's a mandate to fail. You can't do both simultaneously. That's why they have it. The priority is inflation, and if inflation is under control, then if you can sort of do something, then sure, go ahead. But I think the bank stopped reading that after they said keep inflation under control because that's what they're comfortable with, and that's what most people are in the monetary economics are more comfortable with as well.
Okay. And I guess let's just talk about this doomsaying. It's certainly a truism among a lot of editors that all economic news is bad news. I don't necessarily, I don't have those editors, so I'm I'm just trying to get a different read in terms of, you know, it doesn't necessarily, you know, we don't have to be portending a recession at all times. And yeah, I
Yeah,
just want to get your kind of take that
yeah.
you know, trying to break out of this narrative a little bit.
Yeah, I was doing an interview with on a Vancouver radio station a while ago, and they were talking about the concerns about the slowdown in the housing sector. This is Vancouver, like a fall in housing prices in Vancouver is a good news story. We've just spent 20 years worrying about prices going too high. The prices falling a bit, take the win. There is something about doing forecasts that people think that if you have to be taken seriously, you have to be grim. And I don't really see that. I mean, certainly, it's easier to sell, like easier to sell or something grab the attention rather. You
Yeah.
need to get more attention by doing by being negative. But of course, there are people the pundits who basically spend their career always predicting doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about punditry is that nobody notices or cares if you get something wrong. Like if you can get one right call, like or it's not even the right
Yeah.
call. I predicted the great crash of 2023. I mean, they also predicted the great crash of 2022, 2021. That's people make their people do dine out on these things
Yes.
here. So
Yes.
they do. There is some of that going on. One thing also is going on in the financial market punditry is that financial markets players, they want interest rates to come down, so they're going to see a lot of sometimes they're actually, to a certain extent, some of them are actually campaigning for low interest rates. And one way of doing that would be to sell the idea that we're heading for disaster. The bank should be cutting to head off disaster. And once financial market manage to persuade everybody that everybody's expecting interest rates to fall, that means the bank has to go along with it. Otherwise, they'll be creating a bad news surprise on financial markets, and the banks, Bank of Canada can't provide a bad news shock to the financial markets. So this is going to have to do exactly what the financial market wants. Otherwise, they're going to get the bad headline of Bank of Canada surprises markets without by not cutting interest rates or even increasing them, which is also. So there is a certain amount of that going on. Like we certainly saw that under the Greenspan years in the United States, where financial markets, in some sense, would try to would have their own narrative of we have to keep interest rates low, or interest rates have to be even lower, otherwise we'll be disappointed, and you don't want us to be disappointed.
Okay.
So there's a bit of that going on too, I think.
All right. Well, that's very interesting to know, and it kind of puts a lot of that into perspective. So thanks for just kind of walking us through this, and we'll do this again sometime.
Okay, that was fun. All
right. Thanks.
Bye.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.